Okay, Professor, I'm glad that I'm hosting you once again during this time. Let me also wish you Merry Christmas before even we end this show. But perhaps you've been closely watching what is on the political space of recent, and maybe I would love to have your take on the way you're seeing things currently.
The current political space does not show a shift from what it has been since independence. It is a reflection and a manifestation of a deeply divided society. Divided along very many fronts, including ethnic division, religious division, regional division, class division, but also political division. So we are lacking national identity, we are lacking national cohesion, and the politics we do have is a reflection of that divided society. I have said it before and I will say it here, that Uganda is a state, a nationless state. It is a state because the British created Uganda with all the boundaries. We have marked boundaries. We have shared institutions of government. We have our territorial boundaries recognized by the UN. And therefore we are a state, and we have a national army, national university, national this and that. But in terms of the national spirit, nationhood, community integration, we still lack it. We don't have shared values, shared ideas, shared destiny, and a society, a country, a state without those attributes of nation is a divided country. And these divisions are reflected in the politics of no principles. You find that there is no ensonga. I think that's how they put it in Uganda. We don't have ensonga politics. We don't have principled politics. We have principled, we have politics of survival. Politics of political position, politics of ndirawa. So once you have such a politics, then it is manifested in the kind of politics you see. People shifting every other day, people hopping from political party to political party, hopping from this political support to the other support. Politics of citizens being bribed during elections by a mere half a kilogram of salt. And you go to parliament, you find people are fighting amongst themselves rather than competing for principles and ideas. They are competing in hooliganism actually, and competing in militarism, and competing in abusing each other, not competing around critical principles of politics that can create this nation. You may ask me, which principles are those? For example, we need to fight over civic principle ideas and principles such as equality. Are we fighting over equality of different societies in Uganda? Are we fighting over certain regions having poverty levels of 60% and above, and others are in 10% and below? Are we fighting over equal participation in politics or equal access to the public space, freedom of assembly and association? Or are we fighting over who has eaten more than the other? So that is where we are.
When you talk like this, it is over 60 years since independence. Why has the narrative failed to change?
Because first of all, the underlying challenge are what we call structural challenges. That Uganda, first of all, Uganda is a relatively new country, 130 years old. That's not a long period in time. but two is that it is a post-colonial state, a state that was created from outside, not through internal dynamics. And three, that we are still poor. We have not shifted away from what we were at independence up to now. Uganda became independent 62 years ago when it was an agrarian society, meaning citizens largely employed in agriculture. We are still largely employed in agriculture. We haven't shifted. It was not as urbanized. It is still unurbanized. We were still, of course, different nations or nationalities, not put together, not merging together, not intergroup brought together. We still are not. And therefore, you cannot shift unless you address the national question. So we have never addressed the national question in our politics, and we shall remain marching time in these issues of politics of non-nsonga, politics of non-principled issues. Yeah, we have got a political cost in the sense that we have not settled down to plan and implement development politics, development in Uganda. There is a common narrative saying in the public that good policies are made in Uganda, perfected in Kenya, and implemented in Rwanda. What does it mean? Is that we make good policies for the country, whether they are political policies, whether they are economic policies, whatever programs we do have, but they are never implemented. And because of that, we are still a least developed country. Incidentally, at independence, we were at par with Tanzania and Kenya. We are talking about the traditional East African common countries. I don't know whether citizens are aware that of the three countries, we are the only ones which is not yet a middle income. Because Kenya entered into middle income status long ago.
Yeah, about 3-4 years ago.
Yeah, Tanzania entered into middle income, I think, 2 years ago. We are still trying to enter into middle income. Why? Because we are not resolving the national question. But it has also cost us political democracy. It is a country that has not seen a president handing over power to the other. This is a country that has seen more civil wars in the East African community, the traditional one, than the rest. And this is a country which is decreasing in certain respects of development. Let's talk about quality of education. It is a well-known fact that at independence, Uganda was higher than Kenya and Tanzania in terms of quality of education. Today, you can go and read those who have done research reports. Uganda now lags behind Kenya and Tanzania in quality of education. That is the cost we have. Otherwise, it is a political cost. Otherwise, what other reason can we give? Because Uganda is naturally endowed by natural resources better than those countries. In terms of weather, we are better off. And in terms of that background of having an educated class, we are better than them. But we have now gone down, decreased, because of the political cost of having deeply divided society, which has failed to have a deliberate effort to address the national question.
One time I was listening to President Yoweri Museveni, and he was talking about priorities, especially when the NRA took over the power. And he said his priority was first to concentrate on security, the security of the country. And then the rest would come, because without security you would not achieve the rest. So is it a matter of priorities, or we are only slowly trying?
No, security is a priority. But I slightly differ from my President Museveni how to define the security. So has he addressed the security question in terms of strategic planning? My answer is no. because insecurity is brought about by underlying causes, and one of the underlying causes of insecurity is inequality. If you don't address the structural cause of insecurity, which is inequality, then you have not addressed security. Of course, having this other security of controlling the borders and controlling dissidents and controlling means of coercion is part of ensuring security, but it's not the primary issue of addressing insecurity. The primary one is creating a nation. One way of creating a nation is addressing inequality. Now, look at this disparity. They say actually now is above 60% of poverty. This is determined by UBOS and Equal Opportunities Commission. Karamoja is the same. The East is following on the same. But the Central and West are doing slightly better. That was the situation at independence. That was partly responsible for political divisions at independence. We are still having it. So was that one addressed? Now we have added on class. You see, the distance between the poor and the rich is increasing. There is a very big difference. And this translates into social distance. That there are those who take their children to USA schools. And there is a class now that takes their children either in private schools, good ones, or international schools, or even abroad. There is a class of people who stay on Chikamando. And there are those who eat in these high-rise 4-5-star hotels in Kampala.
On a daily basis.
On a daily basis. Actually, their problem of feeding of food is today, can we change to the ribs or can we continue with chicken?
I get you.
When others cannot. This is a country that has no public transport system. So increasingly, you move in the evening around 7 and you see how many people are walking all the way from the city center up to places like Namugongo, like Bwaise, Kawempe, Gayaza, and Natete on foot. Others are just moving in siren cars and these
ACs and so on.
ACs and whatever. Now, we are having two countries in one in terms of economic development. Incidentally, Uganda's economy is developing, according to statistics we get from government and World Bank and others. But in terms of equal opportunities to accessing public resources and in terms of public investment, we are not doing very well. So I don't know whether NRM looks at equality, equal opportunity as a strategic policy of building a nation, or to them is just having more income and income. Even if you get more income to the people, when others are extremely rich and others are extremely poor, the country will not be a nation.
Is the problem the implementation? Because when I hear the minister tabling the budget in parliament, you hear him saying that this budget is organized according to the Charter for Fiscal Responsibility, and that entails, answers the equation of inequality and gender balance.
Fiscal policy, if you can, we can build on what you are talking about. Fiscal policy actually refers to revenue and expenditure. Now, in terms of revenue, by the way, we are not doing it very well, as the impression is given. In terms of corrections by Uganda Revenue Authority, Uganda Revenue Authority corrects the list in the whole of East Africa, the traditional East Africa.
East Africa.
In terms of GDP ratio. But two, we have got what they call retrogressive tax policy, not progressive tax policy, in the sense that we tax consumption, not income. Tax is largely falling on
the goods consumed.
The goods consumed, meaning taxing everybody equally, meaning taxing the poor at the same rate as the wealthy. Instead of targeting income, Why aren't we doing that? Because of policy implementation failure. We have failed to bring into the bracket the taxable people. And we have failed to identify them. That's a policy issue. And that's the weakness of government, that you should identify that income. But at times it is done deliberately, where some people are exempted from paying tax, but others, even if they are not exempted, they can easily evade tax without being caught. That is the weakness of the state in terms of tax administration. That's one of the weaknesses we are talking about. But others are policy. Me, I don't believe that people who are, for example, for example, have got 100 Frisian cows should not be taxed directly. They should be. Those are high income earners. Why do you tax somebody who earns 300,000? But you don't tax somebody with 100 cows, Frisian at that. You don't tax somebody who sells 2 lorries of matoke. You don't tax somebody who produces 100 sacks of rice, because all those are not taxed. I think that's a failure in the fiscal policy. Yeah, but even our monetary policy has issues.
Okay, going back to the national question, the political space. When was the last time you remember, as Professor Ndebesa, that the core principles of democracy were at play in Uganda?
Thank you for that question about the core principles of democracy. Let's actually disentangle this question of democracy, because at times when people talk about democracy, immediately they think of elections. Elections every after 5 years. That's ritual. That's ritual. Yes, free and fair elections is one of the elements of democracy. Another one is equality. Another one is participation. Another one is rule of law. Another one is separation of powers. There could be very many, but we can use those 5 elements of democracy. Are they in place? My answer is no. Although we have had elections every 5 years, it has been marred with irregularities, and therefore has no legitimacy in the eyes of the population. But that is also one element. What about the rule of law? Are we following the rule of law? And rule of law is wide. We are talking about, does the parliament follow the right procedures? Does the executive follow the right procedures?
The judiciary,
the judiciary right the right procedures. What about separation of powers? Is parliament independent, autonomous of the executive? Is the judiciary autonomous of the executive? What about equality? I've just mentioned how unequal our society is, but that is even at the economic financial level. What about political equality? Are we practicing equality? Do all political players have equal access to the public space? We are talking about participation. In the public space, I think the answer is no. And that is where the challenge is. Now, when you don't have equal participation and the political space is not equal, that is a recipe for political conflicts, which can later translate into political violence. So we have to practice democracy, but also attitudes. Have the attitudes we hold changed? Are they in consonant with democratic practices? I am afraid no. One attitude.
Are you talking about attitudes of political players?
Attitude, yeah, attitude of democracy. Attitudes of democracy.
Of democracy, okay.
Yes. For example, one attitude of democracy is respect. Respect for opposition. Or opposition here means that even when you are in opposition, you respect those in government. That is one. 2 is tolerance. 3 is accepting and respecting diversity, because we are a diverse country, socially, economically, and otherwise. So do we tolerate each other? Is there demonstrated tolerance between the different political players? Because if you don't tolerate each other and are we subjecting ourselves to civil way of doing politics, or we have militarized the political space? Because the political space is militarized. It is not civil. We have to use force to make citizens obey the laws. You know, you don't have to use, people should have attitude policing. Not every time that you have to arrest them when they go to meet in Busabara, not to arrest them when they have had a political rally, not to threaten the violence, but that people accept to tolerate each other, to dialogue with each other without being coerced. Once you are demonstrating politics of coercing for people to obey the state, for people to be loyal to the state, they must be forced to be loyal to the state, then that is an indicator that we don't have yet a nation. People should not be coerced to accept the government in power and to accept the laws and obey the laws. They should have self-policing, and we have to develop those attitudes. Yeah.
So, as the custodian of constitutionalism, when was that time that we went wrong, we went astray?
No, the custodian of constitutionalism, one is citizens. Another one is parliament. Another one is judiciary. Another one is executive. Those are the custodians of constitutionalism. Constitutionalism here meaning believing and practicing constitutionalism. Now, you cannot have constitutionalism unless and until you have the right attitudes for constitutionalism. Because a constitution is a mother of the laws. So, are we playing by the laws? Are we going by the rule of law? I'm afraid we are not. And therefore, we missed it from time of independence. In 1961, the British came up with a report clearly showing the societies of Uganda, how they relate. It was called the Munster Commission Report, popularly, but otherwise it was Uganda Relationships Commission Report. And it showed all these disagreements within the country. I wish many Ugandans out there could look for the Munster Commission Report or Uganda Relationships Commission Report. You read it and you see the foundation of the Ugandan independent state. It clearly showed how deeply divided we were. But then, what have we done about it? Now, where we lost it is that we have not concentrated on building a nation and resolving the national question. We have concentrated on, the political class has concentrated on how do they get into positions of the state and how do they take advantage of these positions, either to enrich themselves or enrich their ethnic group. Recently, this was demonstrated by the speaker, Anita Mong, and Honorable Chinyamatama, somewhere in Rwengo district. Was it Rwengo or whatever district?
It was Rwengo.
Rwengo, or yes. There was this MP who had been arrested, the lady MP, and then she went home.
Namuga.
Yeah.
Was it no? No. Not Honorable Namuga.
One of those who had been arrested over corruption and had been released, and then she held a rally as a Thanksgiving for surviving the case, although she hasn't survived. And then at the rally, these MPs were telling the population, the citizens, the voters out there, that it is okay, it is fine if you steal from the national coffers,
share with the public
and share the crumbs with your voters. One, what annoyed me was that the citizens celebrated those statements. And two, that the national leaders could make such a statements and go away with them. Now, that's where we have gone wrong. It's because then the people there in Rwengo do not identify national finances with good governance. for them is to get what they can get. So they are not concerned about national issues. And each community doesn't mind what happens in another community. It means the NRM has got this slogan or statement or policy, whatever, which they came with from the bush, having an integrated economy. But before we have an integrated economy, we should have an integrated community. We should have an integrated society. We should have an integrated Uganda. As long as the political class don't mind about what happens outside their home community, that's where we got it wrong.
Okay. Professor, talking about the, the citizens, don't you think they are just tired and they have nothing to do? Say, you go and eat whatever you want for us.
If we can get the little to eat.
There are no avenues of accountability.
Now, looking at it from an intellectual level, you will be excused for those who will not appreciate intellectualism, is that actually we don't have citizens, we have subjects. There is a difference between the citizen and the subject. So most Ugandans are subjects, they are not citizens, because citizens partake and participate and demand to participate in what happens in the country in terms of correcting their leaders, correcting the way they are governed, and put things right, and mindful and are mindful, and they are activists and they are active citizens. But those who wait to get the crumbs, like the Rwengo people waited, and many others are waiting to clap because a national leader has come home on Christmas, is driving these guzzlers that they drive together with the lead cars, and is splashing dust in their eyes, and they become happy, and they are merry, and they are going to visit him, not knowing that that guzzler of their fuel was paid for by their funds, by their tax, and they are consuming a lot, and they are earning a lot of salary at their expense. If you combine all those vehicles, the total amount that is buying those vehicles and servicing them and buying them fuel, that would translate into good healthcare services, schools. But you see, the peasant doesn't know. He thinks that his MP or his minister or other government official passing around with a government vehicle is very important. And he's laughing and he's merry and he's consuming that dust that these big cars are raising, you know, because they are subjects. You know, those of us who are citizens, we just don't celebrate you because these fellows don't have a national agenda for promoting the citizens or the subjects for that matter. For the plight of citizens, you are looking at only GDP per capita, the GDP rising, not looking at whether it translates into good health services, quality of education, housing, sanitation, roads, and things like that.
Okay. Now, going back to the opposition and democracy, what could be the best role of opposition in promoting democracy for a country like Uganda?
First of all, the political class is deeply divided.
Since independence?
Since independence, and it's not only opposition, even the ruling party. If NRM was not in the government, you would see. How? But even now, you wait for primary elections. I've seen Doitanga talking about having a good register, that once we have a good register, things will go clean. No way. Good or bad register, you will see the kind of division that they are, is even in the NRM. The lack of respect for diversity, respect and tolerance for a colleague that you are competing for. And the whole issue of militarism. You know, militarism doesn't have UPDF. No. That wanting to resolve differences and conflicts by use of force, including using sticks. That is militarism. So the opposition, yes, a role of opposition is necessary for democracy, to always check the excesses of the ruling party. but it is deeply divided. One, because of the structural challenges that Uganda has. If you have the majority of the people as peasants and they are scattered all over the country, and the only literature they read is the Bible every week, and they don't listen to national news and read national newspapers, you don't expect them to have civic competence and civic values, therefore, and civic skills to engage the state. Once you have a society that engages the state, you know, human beings are the same, whether they are in Uganda or South Korea. But the difference between South Korea and Uganda, by the way, South Korea was at the same level of development with Uganda at independence, roughly. Today, South Korea's GDP is $2 trillion. Uganda is 45 billion, not even 1 trillion, not even half a trillion. We are only 45.
Just 45, Professor?
Yes, the GDP of Uganda is 45 billion US dollars. And the GDP per capita is hovering now around 1,000. That's why we are not a middle income country as yet. And South Korea's I think GDP per capita is above 30,000 US dollars. For us, we are 1,000, they are 30,000. Now, recently, they had a political crisis. And you see how their institutions are working, not the whims of the people, not individuals, but principles in songa. So, the president declared martial law. Parliament, whether opposition or government, they all came together. He said, no, that is null and void. He sent the army to disperse parliament. And the army reached there and said, why are we dispersing parliament, by the way? Why? The president is wrong. How can we follow wrong orders? The army did not disperse parliament. And the motion passed. You see how now institutions are working? And then the police started investigating the head of state to the extent that I think they raided State House, President's office, to get the documents to incriminate him in issuing a wrong order, an undemocratic order, a non-constitutional order. So their institutions are working, and therefore they are emerging out of a crisis. But because they are a nation state, they are Koreans. Here, there are no Ugandans. There are people living in Uganda. There are different communities in Uganda
who are just subjects.
Who are subjects, and their concern is the survival. They have high survival instincts, merely surviving, not correcting the wrongs of the politics and society, so that we have a strong state and a strong nation and strong institutions and good governance.
Have you heard of a perception that the government intentionally doesn't want to promote civic education?
You have heard that one. Because they have not carried out civic education, because the institution that is supposed to carry out civic education, that is mandated officially by the Constitution.
Electoral Commission? No,
it is the Uganda Human Rights Commission.
Oh.
Yeah, the Electoral Commission is voter education.
Oh, okay.
For civic education, but how much money is given to the Uganda Human Rights Commission to carry out civic education in the whole country?
That's another question.
But civic education should also be carried out by schools. So we don't have civic education, civics and civic education subject in our curriculum. We don't have it. So I think now the civic education that is carried out in Uganda is done in Changwazi. Is done in Muchaka on patriotism. But you see, that is not general civic education. It is civic education limited to the promotion of the NRM ideology. We want civic education that promotes civic principles and civic values. And it is those civic universal values and principles that will promote nationhood. Because if we all believe in equality, we all believe in the rule of law, we all believe in liberty, we all believe in solidarity, we all believe in diversity, unity in diversity, that will bring about nationhood. But if you leave citizens to remain like this, so that is why I have challenged my colleague Kabjanga, the Minister of
State for ICT.
for national guidance, whether they have a national guidance, agenda. We should have a national guidance agenda and a national guidance law, even act, that spells out what we want Uganda to be, and even sanctioning those who would deviate away from the Uganda that we want, guided by civic values, not tribal values, not ethnic values, not religious fundamentalism, and not neo-patrimonialism or patronage, but civic values. Of course, building a nation takes time. It is evolutionary. It is not revolutionary. But we should be on the right path, not on the wrong path. Because to be on the right path, you must have an agenda clear, insonga clear, and then you must be seen to be pursuing that insonga, even if you have reached 40%, but they can see that you are going the right path. But that is this business of moving 2 steps forward and 1 step backward.
So in the question of active participation, going back to the politics, proportionate representation, active participation, are Ugandans mixing human rights with the democracy?
No, human rights is a component of democracy. Human rights, because I told you that the elements of democracy include human rights. So human rights is a component of democracy.
Okay.
So are we promoting human rights? Or are we promoting rights? By the way, it shouldn't be only the fundamental political liberty rights. That is political and civil rights. We need also to promote social rights. The right to education, the right to food, the right to health services, the right to public transport. These are also rights that we should be addressing. And when we lack them, then the state, which is supposed to be the duty bearer, should now be held accountable. So accountability is also an element of democracy and responsibility. But are Ugandans holding our government accountable? I'm afraid they don't. And that is why I call them subjects, not citizens. Yes.
So the democracy of consensus, we've seen several leaders coming up with electoral reforms, political reforms. So what is your say about this?
We don't have to have consensus. Even if we don't have consensus in respect of all having the same ideology, even if we have different ideologies, provided we respect each other, provided we tolerate each other, provided we practice civil politics, not militarism, not militarizing political competition, we could still move ahead. But we are lacking this
The principles.
Consensus on principles, civic principles. So we have a country where when, you know, there are some communities here who have got national anthems, anthems for their nationalities. When they are being sung, you can see how the citizens are sentimentally attached to ekitibwa kya Buganda or whatever it is for Bunyoro or for the Japadora. When they are singing the national anthem, sometimes people just don't mind, you know. That is a reflection of lack of...
A very big population only know the first stand.
Only one stanza. So that is, but if you say almost all Buganda, even illiterate ones, know all the stanzas of Ekitibwa kya Buganda, that is a reflection of lack of a national identity. Nobody is saying we shouldn't have these ethnic identities. They should be there, but we should also have a national identity. And President Museveni has been talking about identity politics, and he's saying He has been on nationwide tours castigating identity politics. But I want him to join me. Or I join him. I agree with him that we should not have national politics mixed up with ethnic identity politics. But he should also talk about national identity. Identity is not only ethnic. No, it's not only ethnic nationalism. Are we promoting national identity? Because we need to promote national identity based on civic values and civic principles, not based on ethnic principles or religious principles or even partisan principles. No, we need, but we haven't agreed on these national civic principles. That's why we need a national dialogue to agree on the national principles of a civic nature so that we promote those as we also remain with our other subnational issues. But we are not doing that.
What is the foundation of this national dialogue? Because it's seemingly what these people are fronting.
You see, we can't have a national dialogue unless all citizens agree on it, especially the principal player, which is now the NRM government. Do they believe in a national dialogue on equal basis, yeah, on equal participation? Do they agree on a national dialogue that does not necessarily promote NRM? Because you are likely even to have a national dialogue and it will be shaped in such a manner that it is a national dialogue not looking at resolving the national question, but strengthening the NRM as a party in the government. We need to look at the national dialogue resolving the national question. And we have very many questions, sub-national questions. I can mention them here for the attention of the listeners. In the national question and sub-questions, we have the northern question. That is the north versus south. We have the Buganda question. It has never gone away. We have the Bunyoro question. We have the Rwenzori question. We have the Karamoja question. We have the military question. We have the religious question. And some other sub-questions. Now it seems as if the Western question is also emerging in Uganda. So, are we addressing those questions in one basket I'm calling the national question? Is there a deliberate move to address those questions? A question here refers to some lingering factor that does not go away. It was there in 1961 when the Uganda Relations Commission, the Munster Commission report was published. It is still there. Have we attempted to resolve the national question? There have been attempts, but along the way we divert from them and start promoting partisan issues. We need to resolve the national question and define it very clearly. For example, now patriotism, I think, is one way, one method, one political policy of attempting to resolve the national question. But we have not defined it. What are the elements in patriotism? What are they? Because some people can look at patriotism as promoting one party, promoting one leader, promoting a similar line of politics, but not addressing the agreed upon civic values and civic principles that will pay attention to the national question, to the national questions that have never been resolved. So we need to have a deliberate effort, but to do that one, we must first appreciate, I repeat, Uganda and our leaders now who are controlling the levers of power must first appreciate that there is a national question. Because there are those who claim there is no national question. Issues were resolved. When NRM, for example, came into power, there is no problem. Everything is okay. Uganda will always be here. Okay. But before I go from that, that Uganda will always be here, I want to say no. Uganda can continue to be here, but Uganda can disappear, especially when we are not yet a fully functioning nation state. When we are still a nationalist state. I will give you some examples. Yugoslavia was a country, was one country, but not a nation. It was a nationalist state. Today it has 6 countries. They are still fighting. That was Yugoslavia under Marshal Tito. You had the Soviet Union. It had very many very many states within it. It crumbled. Now you can see they are fighting Ukraine because Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union. It crumbled. We have this country called Libya. It is not a nation now. It has divided. You have Sudan, especially North Sudan now. I mean, they say 10 million people are already in displaced camps.
We had Syria of recent.
We had Syria. We have South Sudan here, our neighbor. We have Congo here. We have Somalia there. We have Ethiopia, which is almost disintegrating. So we have to be very careful and address the national question and have a nation state functioning, strengthen our state institutions, because strengthening state institutions, which our donors even have been funding, our donors have never known the fundamental problem of Uganda and Africa in general. They strengthen state institutions without strengthening the people. If you have institutions that are not collaborating and not working together, you need to make them work together, function collaboratively, and strengthening them in order to deliver public services. Agreed. But they will not do that unless you first also strengthen community bonding, cohesion, and you form a Uganda nation. These donors don't know. You know, they have spent millions and billions and whatever in strengthening capacity building for state institutions. They have forgotten, they have ignored nation building. That unless you have these different communities that make up the state also function and work together, you cannot have the state functioning. It will disintegrate, and the whole of post-colonial Africa. Now let me give examples of other countries that have succeeded. Africa and Latin America, South America have failed since independence. For them, South America got independence even 200 years ago. But they have not made a headway. We, Africa and Southeast Asia, got independence at the same time. We were all colonized, but they are now becoming first world. South Korea is the 11th richest country in the world. Singapore is following on the footsteps. Thailand, Vietnam, which has been involved in wars until recently, has now a per capita income of $5,000. Why? Because they are nation states and we are not a nation state. They are nations. Singapore is a nation. South Korea is a nation. Vietnam is a nation. That's why they are developing. Africa and Latin America, they are not nations. They are groups which are scattered. So unless they address the national question, I'm talking about Africa and Latin America and the Middle East, they can't go very far. The Middle East has no nation states. It has states without a nation. That's why they are going to continue in this quagmire in the Middle East, because they were part of the Ottoman Empire. Later they were part of the British and French Empire. And when they got independence, they also ignored the national question. They concentrated on different tribes and communities promoting their individual interests. And they have not promoted citizenship, they have promoted subjects.
So Professor, 1 is better than 0. If these people are saying, well, okay, the NRM is not willing to give in power right now, but we have nothing to do but to dialogue with them, irrespective of the national question and so on, isn't it a good move?
But at times 0 is better than -1. You get me?
Repeat
instead
that.
Of 0 is better than -1.
Okay.
So instead of going in a minus, you'd rather remain at 0. You see, you get me? You'd rather remain at 0 and then work towards getting to 1. But moving to the negative and you think because you are moving backwards. So if you have to join NRM, which should be okay, if you have to cooperate with NRM in order to move the country forward, it should be based on ensonga, on a principle, on a principled stand, not moving there because they have promised you a job, they have promised you money, or because you have got money, and because you have got money and people have shouted at you, you say now that you have shouted at me, let me move this direction. That is moving from 0 to negative instead of moving to positive. So yes, 1 is better than 0, but -1 is worse than 0. So you'd rather remain at 0 rather than going into the negative.
So what exactly are these promoters of dialogue fronting?
You know, dialogue has been promoted before. It's not new.
We had TDA some time ago.
Before TDA. Actually, TDA was meant for a coalition.
Coalition
for opposition forces. No, there was an attempt. First of all, it is in the constitution. Dialogue is in the constitution. And I think, is it still Hakana Rugunda or somebody else? Or it is now this NRM chairman of Buganda is called who?
I think it is still Rahana Rugunda.
No, I don't think he's still the one. But assuming he's still the one, that one is in the constitution to have a dialogue. But it has dragged on, it has not been funded, it has not been in the budget, it is not serious. Then there was iPod, which did not work because they did not have agreement on how to dialogue. Then the civil society proposed this dialogue, especially, remember, the Elders Forum, the Interreligious Council Forum, or Uganda Joint Christian Council, then some NGOs, the women, is it women security room or something like that? They came up with a proposal for a dialogue. I think at one time we even had a citizens compact to be discussed by Parliament, and we have constitutional reviews. So there has not been initiatives for having a national dialogue, but they have all come to naught. Have we found out why they have come to naught? Or we are founding many of these democratic alliances, like the recent one of Mpuga. But did he sit down to find out, 1, why the other ones failed? 2, on which principles should we base on, and which modalities we should have to have a national dialogue? Because if you have a national dialogue without having a dialogue within a dialogue, i.e. agreeing as to how you will use the outcome, the resolutions of the dialogue to come to naught. I thought they first agree on how they will dialogue, and 2, when they agree on certain principles, how will they be used? You first agree on that. My take would be that we would say what we agreed upon will be put in the constitution. And whoever violates that constitution, we fight you. And there we shall have a dialogue. But this dialogue of wanting to get space, also a space on the table for eating, is not going to create a nation state. It's not going to resolve the national question.
Can we have a successful dialogue when the opposition is divided?
You see, the opposition is divided because we have also failed to have a dialogue. And 2, you are talking about political position. Politics of resolving the national question is too important for only the political class to participate in. With society, in all shades, to participate. We need the church, the mosque, the intellectuals, the cultural organizations, the business community to participate and not be participated. Because you can be participated instead of participating. I could see to a certain extent during this Constituent Assembly, members were being participated instead of real participating. In Kiswahili they call it kushirikishwa, to be participated, to participate in a dialogue when actually the principles have been agreed upon by others, and the process of the dialogue is also being influenced and shaped from outside the dialogue space. So yes, we can have a dialogue, but in most cases, successful dialogues have taken place when the political group in power is weak in the sense of not having a grip on the means of coercion. If the political policy, when we talk about policies, people always go to agricultural policy, I don't know, health policy, education policy. We have political policy. If the political policy of the party, both written and unwritten, are not pro resolving the national question, and they are still strong in using coercive machinery, the political dialogue will not yield the fruitful results of resolving the national question that we failed to resolve in 62, 61, and the London talks. We failed to resolve during UNLF, failed to resolve during the 1995 Constitution, and we are failing to resolve. I wish Ugandans could change and resolve this, but the will, the impetus to resolve the national question will come from citizens. Okay. Let the citizens become, the population, let them become citizens, so that there is a political cost for not following the agreed upon principles that we shall have agreed upon. Even if we have a national dialogue and agree, the citizens are the biggest guarantors of implementing the national dialogue outcomes. And it shouldn't be only during elections. No, politics continues.
Professor, finally, as we wrap up this, I would also need to have your take on the political reforms presented by Honorable Norbert Mao, the change of the electoral system.
You know why I'm laughing? Norbert Mao presented them to who? He says to cabinet. Is he bent on only cabinet? Should have presented them to the nation. Today, me and you and UBC would be discussing those proposals. Where did he present them? We don't know. The last time he told us he had presented the proposal for the national transition, political transition, to President Museveni in the cooperation agreement. You remember?
Yeah.
And then President Museveni, in a certain press conference, I don't know whether you were there, he says, me? When did I agree with Mao? I didn't. We didn't agree on that one. Did you hear it? So, I'm going to use a Chinyankore proverb, Chinyankore Chiga proverb, and I translate it, and maybe it can take the message home about the Mao reforms. And we say that ebisherekirwe biribwa embeba. Ebisherekirwe biribwa embeba.
Literally meaning?
Literally meaning, when you hide things from the view, the rats will gnaw at them. Is it gnawing them? They will be eaten by the rats. Yeah? And they will end there. They will not have value. So why doesn't Mao present those proposals to the general public and we discuss them? Because they concern us, the public. And it's a welcome idea, but you say cabinet, we don't go to cabinet. What is resolved in cabinet, we don't know. Which direction it will take. We don't know whether what he will have proposed will even have been bought into. We are supposed to have constitutional reforms, electoral reforms before elections. We are coming to elections. There are no reforms. So what is Mao talking about? If he hides those agreements like he hid the cooperation agreement, it will be eaten by the rats. Did he discuss the cooperation agreement with DP?
And he is saying that after the elections, because this cooperation agreement ends in this term,
they can renew it.
And he says he's willing to renew, but at the same time, he is going to contest for the presidency.
What's wrong with that? He can contest.
What does it mean?
You know, in Rwanda, they contest. We have opposition in Rwanda. Do you know who stood in Rwanda opposing Kagame? Can you name him? But there was opposition. Was that opposition? You can have some people representing opposition, contesting with you to legitimize the exercise. So Mao wants to tell us that he's going to contest. First of all, he will break the agreement, or he will participate in the, because he has now a collective responsibility to do. So at what point is he going to debate those principles he's talking about that he disagrees with NRM, since he's still within? Is he going to resign? And at what point is he going to resign? He should have resigned now, because we are in the campaign mode. So I think let's discuss issues seriously and not play around. And which principles are we discussing? Ensonga. Where is Ensonga? Where is the issue? What is the issue? Are we discussing the national questions? Are we discussing political militarism? What is the role of the military in political competition? Are we discussing strengthening institutions? Are we discussing creating a nation? Are we discussing political corruption? Because there is political corruption, you know, pervasive political corruption. People paper over it, talk about financial corruption. This one has a better result, this one has a... Why don't we address political corruption, which is the mother of financial corruption? Why? Have we tabled it? Has Mao tabled the question of political corruption? Has he asked the citizens how to define political corruption? You remember last time the citizens came up with, the youth and some professor from Makerere came up with an exhibition. They exhibited corruption. The IGG, Madam Kamya, has been time and again asking the public to assist her, work with her to fight corruption. And they came up with the exhibition, Madam Kamya. Didn't they exhibit? They exhibited Parliament. What have you done as IGG? They exhibited, and they exhibited as institutions, by the way. And they continue to exhibit. And government has been amending this constitution many times. Yeah, we agreed. Constitutions are normally amended. But towards which direction? To the best of my knowledge, because I've been following these amendments, most of the amendments, if not all, have been amendments to strengthen the state vis-a-vis the citizens or the subjects. You look at all of the amendments strengthening the state. I've not seen amendments strengthening civil society, strengthening society to hold the state accountable, but strengthening the state against the citizens. So, if we want to address the national questions, including corruption, corruption is a national question that has lingered on, then let's strengthen the citizens so that citizen-state relationships are such that they are balanced. But we are amending the constitution time and again to strengthen the state and not strengthen the citizen. Actually, to weaken the citizens. So as long as the political reforms and constitutional reforms and the legal reforms are for strengthening the state and not strengthening the citizens, then we shall remain with the national questions lingering on, including the corruption question. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor.
I want to first send a message to the citizens for the new year. I would want to say Merry Christmas and Democratic 2025. Merry Christmas and Democratic New Year of 2025. I thank you, fellow citizens.
Thank you very much.